the racist exclusion of people from political rights on the basis of skin color. The experience of the First Nations in Canada is often called an apartheid experience, pushed aside into reservations so the land can be settled by Europeans. But when we call Israel apartheid, we are called anti-Semitic. It is called racist. It is ridiculous. It is a simple term. It's an accurate term. It describes the fact that 8% of historic Palestine is occupied. Israel intervenes at will in the remaining 22%. There are two types of people who live in this territory. If you have Israeli citizenship, you can drive down the road in the West Bank. You have your own road. If you're Palestinian, you go through checkpoints. You go through the daily humiliation of having to show your identity. You go through the daily humiliation of every now and then being hauled off to jail. You are treated differentially. It's an apartheid state. It's a complete violation of international law. I was told that I had to do this in 15 minutes, and I said that's going to be impossible because when I get to the section on international law, the list of violations of international law that the Israeli apartheid state has engaged in is so long that I'll need at least half an hour just to read the list. I won't read the list. Look up the Geneva Convention. Look up the Hague Convention of 1907. Look up the decisions of the General Assembly. I'll start with one, the decision of the General Assembly in 1948 that said the Palestinian refugees have the right to return, which of course hasn't happened. Look at the 1979 Security Council resolution, which says that it is illegal for Israel to build any settlements in its occupied territory, West Bank and Gaza, completely violated every day, over and over again. The list is long. I won't read the whole thing. Take it for granted that it exists. So what do we do? I was a student at York in the 1970s and 80s. My Greek friends were here in exile because Greece was a dictatorship. My Chilean friends were here in exile because Pinochet was slaughtering thousands in Chile. Nelson Mandela, the great leader of the liberation movement in South Africa, was in prison. The African National Congress was called a terrorist organization. That was its official designation. In 1976, I remember it like it was yesterday, the young people of Soweto, in impossible circumstances, rose up with their fists, with stones pulled from the pavements, and they against the bullets and whips of the apartheid state. When we saw that, and other things, we knew we had to act. We knew we had to, so we did stuff. So we organized. We did what you folks are doing. We picketed. We had protests. We did letter writings. We went to our administration and said, don't deal with regimes which are breaking international law. Don't have doings with Pinochet in Chile. Don't have doings with apartheid South Africa. Don't invest in apartheid. I won't tell you the whole story of all those extraordinary struggles that went up and down over the years, but suffice it to say that my Greek friends can now go home. My Chilean friends can now go home, visit their family, visit their grandparents. Nelson Mandela, of course, got out of jail and became president of South Africa. Apartheid in South Africa, at least in its legal form, is gone. So today my Palestinian friends are here in exile in Canada and around the world because Israel is an apartheid state and a repressive state, and they can't go home. They can't visit the towns that their parents or grandparents grew up in. They can't visit their family who are still there. But reflecting back on that, I am absolutely convinced that they will be able to go home, that we will win this fight. But that won't happen. That simple human act of being able to go home to your town, or your town of your family, it won't happen without struggle. Now, the decisive point of that struggle will not be here. The decisive point of that struggle will not be in Toronto, or New York, or Chicago, or London, or Paris. The decisive point of that struggle will be in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Palestine, in the rest of the Middle East, in the brothers and sisters of the people in Palestine, in Cairo, in Egypt. And that was true in the 1970s and 80s. The decisive struggle was in South Africa. It was in Soweto. It was amongst the black miners. It was the armed struggle of the African National Congress and their later political struggle. Just as in the 1970s and 80s, that was the decisive point there. The decisive point remains in the point of oppression in the Middle East today. But that doesn't mean that the work here was not important then and is not important today. What we did then, as allies of the struggle, to expose the fact, why does the Canadian state have doings with a racist regime like apartheid? South Africa. Expose that. Why does York University invest in a racist regime like South African apartheid? It should divest from it. That struggle plays a role in giving confidence to the struggle that occurred in South Africa that is critically important today as well. It will be very difficult. This struggle is not easy. Why is, I mean, at one level it's absolutely bizarre. Why is Michael Ignatieff denouncing Israeli apartheid? Why does he care? Why does Stephen Harper make such a big deal about Israeli apartheid? Why does Rob Ford make such a big deal about Israeli apartheid? These people, I mean, Rob Ford barely knows anything about international relations. Like, why does he care? There's a long answer, there's a short answer. The long answer I don't have time for. The short answer is oil. The long answer is more geopolitics, geoeconomics, etc. The Middle East is the most important area of the world. It's the most important area of the world because of the commodities that it contains and because of its trade routes that go through it. It is coveted by the great powers and has been coveted by the great powers for 200 years or more. It is a central pillar of this strategy, and the need for cheap oil is profound. There's been two pillars to it. One has been prop up a colonial settler state, a European colonial settler state in Israel, an apartheid state, as a sort of like a land battleship for the US and its allies in the region, to keep the place divided, to keep it on its toes, and from now and then go to war against other regimes. And on the other part of that pillar has been prop up corrupt, brutal dictatorships in the Arab world. And not just the Arab world, in the Middle East as a whole. This is a problem, because this pillar, we know today, is coming down. There are massive rebellions going on against the brutal dictatorships that exist in the Middle East that have, Gaddafi's a little bit of an exception as a copyist, but Mubarak was the child of the United States. He was an agent for the United States in the region. He's gone. The threat of democracy moving into Israel is a real one, and I'll wrap up. Okay. So it won't be easy because they have very much invested in it. They will put up real opposition. Don't let that stop you. I'm going to, I want to end on a personal note, if you'll indulge me for a second. This is March 10th. March 10th was my father's birthday. He passed away 3 years ago. I wouldn't know anything about Palestine if it wasn't for him. I was a young kid, you know, United Emperor Loyalist kid. You grow up in Ontario, you know all this stuff. You read, I don't know if you know this book, Leon Uris, Exodus, the book, and it tells about the great story of Israel and the creation of Israel, how democratic it is, etc. And I was a kid reading this book, and I thought, this is a great book. Really explains things. This is what it explains things. And I remember going down to the kitchen table, and my father was there. He was a religious man. And he knew his Bible, he knew lots of things, and he looked around and he said, and I said, look at this great book, and I told the story very confidently. He just asked me a simple question, well, what about Palestine? What about the Palestinians? What about people who left their homes? And I said, well, they could go back if they wanted to. He says, I really think so. What about the people who were driven from their homes? What about the massacres that happened that forced them from their homes? Why can't they go back? What about Palestine? He made me think about it. He made me think, he pulled me away from that narrative. And once you ask that simple question, what about the Palestinians? You go down a road which leads you to ending complicity with Israeli apartheid. So, on that note, I'll end my talk. It's a great